I know all but maybe a handful of you, so I'm just going to skip over this. But basically, I've been using Access since version 1. We started using SQL Server when I think it was the first version that split with Sybase, so this is kind of circa 1994, maybe. I spent over 15 years consulting in Colorado. I had a very kind of similar setup to Armin, although it was much smaller. Probably 90% of what we did was an Access front end and a SQL Server backend. And this is when SQL Server was a hard sell because you had to spend $5,000 on the licenses and $5,000 in a box. There wasn't really the Express. Now you've got Azure where you can do it for $5 a month. I joined the Access team in 2008 as a test engineer, back when they tested their software. McCullough, I think we overlapped. You came in April? April was when you joined Microsoft? May. So we overlapped for just a few, like 5 or 6 months. So I worked on part of, or all of the releases of Access. I got retired in 2014. I kind of got bored. I got bored and ended up working with another Access team member, Tim Getsch, who's got a company called comc.com, and it's the short version is that we're a technology company that sells sports cards. So baseball cards, basketball cards, football cards, things like that. Anyway, so that's just who I am. What we're going to talk about today is kind of just a quick overview of how you can use source code control with Access. And we're going to look at a couple tools. One's called OASIS, and the other is Git, which you probably all have heard of Git in some, GitHub or Git this or Git that. We're going to kind of keep it high level, but I wanted to start with just a kind of a show of hands. Who here also develops in Visual Studio in things? So, okay, keep your hands up if you have a source code control that you use with it. So the majority of you use some kind of source code control. So now, I'm assuming everybody here does Access development. Who uses source code control with Access? Okay, what are you guys using as your tool?
Self-written.
Self-written?
Yeah, self-developed one with Power Access and Power Git.
Yep.
TFS.
TFS.
Visual Source Code.
Visual Source Code. Okay. Wow, that's old.
We worked with Access 2010.
I know. Well, I'll show you how to move up and upgrade.
Wow.
And if I know Armin uses this, but he basically checks on the whole database, and that doesn't count in mine.
Yeah, no, we do monolithic check-in, check-out with Access.
That's better than nothing, but you can't diff a version and see what's going on. So we talked about that. Okay, so this is kind of just a basic, why should you use it? Well, multiple developers, it's really hard with Access because it is that monolithic object. It's hard to share. You can't really do it without stepping on each other's toes. Maybe you've deleted or started working on the wrong version of the database, and you're like, oh, what did I do? I don't know. You made changes to the wrong version, the same kind of thing. Who's had a database go corrupt?
Never.
Yeah. 95% of the time you can just recover it, but every once in a while you get an object that's just flat out goofy and it doesn't work and you've got to jump through some hoops. Or maybe you've made a change and don't remember what you did because it's a regression. One of the eye-opening things that I learned when I joined Microsoft is for every 4 bugs you fix, you introduce one.
Yeah.
Which sounds like a really good, thing. Oh, you're fixing 4 and you got 1. The problem is you don't know where that 1 is. And so it's certainly in the traditional cycle where you're not having a click-through release. We slowed down the code churn. We only fixed bugs that were really bad and hope we didn't introduce too many of them. Or nobody's ever made a mistake that when I go back. So Visual Source Safe, and maybe Luke can talk more about this, but my experience with Visual Source Safe dates back to like the late 90s or early 2000s. And it worked. It was really kind of the only game in town. It's kind of a central file-based system where you've got to check in and check out things, which makes it kind of cumbersome to me, but it does work. One of the frustrations I had is you needed to have the source code control add-in tools, which seemed like it changed with every release. In Office 2000, I think it was part of the professional, and there was like a developer version, and then I think in 2003 they ended up putting in some Visual Studio tools, which was kind of goofy. Thankfully, it was free along with the runtime. I think we can actually thank Tim for pushing on that, or at least having some influence to kind of make it free. But unfortunately, it was deprecated in 2013. So there's a bunch of things with pivot tables, pivot charts that were deprecated, and that was one of them. So if you're, like Luke said, you've got to use 2010, or really there isn't anything to do. If you're in that model, there's another program that I'm not going to talk about, but I wanted to point it out, called OASIS-SVN, which is developed by a German, that actually allows you to work in that same kind of model. Where you,
Iversi.
Iversi.
The R is before the C.
Iversi. Okay.
Just for the spell.
And you
Yeah.
spelled the
I think the link's right.
link is right.
Oh, but I have a typo there. I will fix that. Okay, anyways. So it's something to look at. If you're in that model and you don't want to change, it might be suitable for you. What I'm going to show you works on a little different paradigm. And then, Visual Force Safe, the only pro I really came up with was you don't really get very many merge conflicts because you've got to check it out. Nobody else can make the change. You got to check it back in. Yeah, it was a stretch. The con list was a lot longer for me. It was painfully slow to check in and out objects. And again, this dates back, think, 15 years ago at least, or almost 20 years ago. You were talking like a 486 was a really fast machine, and you probably had a 10 megabit network connection, on your desktop. I think the biggest thing for me was, if it wasn't a query form, report, macro, or module, it was the kitchen sink. It was this big blob. So if you wanted to add a table, add a link table, modify anything, you had to check that whole thing out, which means nobody else could do something along those things, and then check the whole thing back in. It was also kind of easy to remove the source code control when you compacted the database. It prompts you to remove it. Well, you only want to remove it when you want to deploy it. And it's dated. It's 2005 is the last time it's been updated. Now you can use Team Foundation Server. You can use Team Foundation Server and stay in that same paradigm, and it's a little more modern. It's kind of server-based. So that's certainly an option. So what we're going to talk about is Git. And who I think most of you have probably used Git, that used to use the Visual Studio, so you're kind of familiar with it. Well, it's what we call a distributed version control system, where in most cases you're going to have a central repository. Usually it's hosted someplace. And then each client has a working directory where they do their changes in a working repository. And then you can sync up and stuff like that. That means you can work offline. You can't push your commits or pull down any changes, but you can at least work offline. You can kind of have all the benefits of the version control. You can see what changes were recently made. And because of the way it works, there's no concept of a check-in or check-out. You basically just say, oh, I've changed these objects, go ahead and export it, and then send it to the repository. Unfortunately, you have to remember to use it. Whereas with the Visual Source Safe model, you couldn't make a change without checking it out. And so it kind of forced you to be in that mentality. So, and then you will have to get merge conflicts if you've got multiple developers. And we're going to show the visualstudio.com, but there's, GitHub has things, and there's a bunch of different flavors out there. So OASIS sits in there as the middleman. This is kind of the replacement for the source code control add-ins that the Microsoft team used to generate. It stands for Office Access Subversion Integration System, which is a mouthful. It was first released in 2007 by another German guy. And we started using it when I joined ComC in the spring of 2015. Tim was a kind of a one-man developer shop for his internal program until I showed up. And so we kind of had to wait not to step on each other's toes, and there was enough stuff that made sense to look for some kind of source code control system. It supports several providers. It came out originally with Subversion, hence the S in OASIS. And then Mercurial was another one you could use. We started using Git from the word go, and it worked with Git, it just wasn't integrated in. So you had to kind of jump through some extra hoops, install some extra software, use Visual Studio to manage your check-ins. But about a year ago, the developer added native support for Git. And so what I'm going to show you is the updated version where it all just kind of integrates in, and it works it's so much easier than having to jump through the thing. So what do you need for this? You're first going to need Git for Windows, which is a command line utility. It's free. You download it, and if you want to type in commands, you can do all your stuff through a command line. You also need TortoiseGit, which is a shell for Git. And this is kind of required because OASIS is going to basically point to this and say, go ahead and do this function with TortoiseGit. Then you need some kind of repository. We're using the visualstudio.com, which I believe is free for up to 5 users. And if you've got more than 5 users on an Access project, maybe you want to rethink what you're doing. I don't know. That's, you know, by today's standards, there's a lot. And then OASIS. It is a paid program. There's a demo version that lets you check in and check out 50 objects at a time. It's fairly moderately priced. I think it did go up a little bit when you added the Git support, but I know a professional developer version is less than $100. It's priced in euros. It's, I think, 79 euros, so that's about $100, something like that. Anyways, you can use the save as text, load from text. Everybody knows about those functions where you can export objects, which is great if you bill by the hour. But you know, if you want something simple, that you know, OASIS will pay for itself in days or weeks. So before we jump in, I'll show a quick topology of how things work. So here's the Access database that we all know and love. And there's a concept of kind of a working folder, a working directory, and that's what OASIS does. OASIS is an add-in that sits there, and it basically manages taking the data here and putting it out here. So if you've ever looked at Visual Studio and you've said open in File Explorer, and it's all these files and folders and stuff like that, that's kind of the working folder. And Access doesn't have that because it's one big database. But with OASIS, it basically will dump out all the objects that are important. And then where Git and TortoiseGit come into play is they move it from the working folder and put it in the repository. So you've got kind of an audit trail. You can see revision histories and things like that. It also will push it to the central repository because so you can share it with other people. Oh, and then I should say that basically the reverse happens where you get a change up here, you bring it down into your local repository with a pull, and then it goes into the working folder, and then OASIS will import the objects back in. So it basically follows the exact same path in different directions. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. And this is a visualstudio.com account. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new project. We'll call it, oh, sorry, that's not a new project. We'll call it Access Day. And I don't give it a description, but it's important to make sure you keep it as Git. You can do the Team Foundation server if you wanted. This doesn't matter. I'll leave it on Agile. But I'll go ahead and hit create. And this typically takes anywhere from 10 or 15 seconds to maybe a minute. Hopefully it'll be faster because we're on the Microsoft network. Of course it will take, hopefully not 3 minutes, but any questions so far? Oh, there it goes. Okay. So it's now created an empty repository, and this URL here is important. You need that because that's how you're going to actually connect to your database. That's like the URL. So this is where that repository lives. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. The other thing I want to do is I want to invite somebody to work on this, and I'm going to go ahead and invite Tim. And I'll go ahead and add, and it'll show that there's another member up there. So now I've built the cloud piece. The next piece we want to do is we want to create a local repository.
Quick.
Yes.
You didn't need to send the URL link to Tim, did you?
No. No, he knows the account. He'll get there and he'll see it. He'll get, I guess, like an email invite or something like that that says, hey, Kevin's invited you to do this. So he'll be able to log on and see.
He'll immediately have access
Right.
to it.
And he's only going to have access to that one project. So all the other projects, I have to invite him explicitly. So you can share with certain people. So here's a directory. And we're going to go ahead and create a repository here. And I can do that by right-clicking, and there's a thing, Git Clone. So if I click on that, And it's smart enough because I was on Visual Studio, it actually remembered the path. And that happens like 99 times out of 100 maybe, and once in a while it doesn't, I'm not sure why. Anyways, so here's the directory. Now, by default, it wants to put another directory in there, and I don't want that. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that out. I usually create a folder for each project, put the Access database in there, and then I create a repo directory where I'm going to put the repository in. So it wouldn't hurt if it was there, it's just a little bit funky. So I'm going to copy that because I'm going to need it in a second. And so we're going to clone the repository, and this is actually going out to the cloud and bringing everything down. And you can see it took 4 seconds, and it's giving me a warning that it appears I've cloned an empty repository, which is what I expect, right, because it's new. If I was getting something that maybe Tim shared with me, I might expect to get something more than that coming down. So that's it. We've actually created the repository locally, and we've got the repository in the cloud. So let's just go back here. I'm not going to go with this. This just is kind of for you guys. I'll give Arm on the slide deck. You can make sure people get it. This is the directory structure kind of I use, where I've got a dev folder or whatever, and then I'll give it the database name, and then create a repo directory. You can come up with any structure you want. You don't have to put the repo there, but I like to have the Access database separate, because I might have a couple where Access crashes and it wants to create a copy, so I don't want that all cluttered up. I want the repo to be just like, these are the objects that I'm dealing with. So clone the repository URL, that's it. So how do we get the objects out with OASIS now? So I'm going to go ahead and open up a very simple database that I did for Vienna. And it's basically 2 tables, there's nothing to it. There is one module that you can see. Here it says Hello Vienna, which we might want to update that. But I'm going to go ahead and check this in. So OASIS runs in its own little tab. And the first thing I need to do, because it's a brand new database, is I need to go into Settings. And I need to point to where my working folder is, which is what I copied in there. And I don't know if you can see, but the OASIS, or the Tortoise SVN, is actually grayed out. And once I hit OK, it's now enabled. So now I have the menu and all the options are there. So what I'm going to do, import. I'm going to do an export. So I'm going to take the objects out of my database and push them into that working folder. And let me just show you, since there's no smoke and mirrors. There you go. I've got an empty folder here. The Git is where the repository is. My working folder is empty. So I'm going to go in here, and for whatever reason, properties don't get selected, which you maybe don't need the properties on a database because they're all default, except for relationships, or sorry, references. So if you're using Excel, your early binding or something, you would want to have those references. So I'm going to do a Control A, which selects all the objects. And now I'm going to hit OK. And this will take just a few seconds, and it's exported the entire database into files. So if we flip back over, you can see here's all the files, right? And for the most part, they're going to be kind of human readable. If we go look at that test.dep, you can see I can read that. Now, if I go look at one of the forms, let's look at the attendee form, and scroll down. This is maybe human readable by Shane. No longer here. Yeah.
It's not that bad, come on.
Well, it is, but the point is forms and reports look a whole lot different. You'll see your code in there, but all the other stuff, you really have to have a master's degree in Access to figure out what it is, and I certainly don't. Anyway, so we now have that, but it's just in our local repository, right? If we go back up to here and say, show me the code, it's like, I'm empty. So the last step we need to do is go to Tortoise, and we want to do, well, first we need to do a commit, which this is going to push it into our local repository. And I'm going to call it...
Pushes into? I mean, that's what you did with export.
No, export just put it in the working directory. I've not put it into my local repository yet.
A repo is not your local repository.
A repo is, but it's the Git folder in there, right? So think of these are like the Visual Studio files. I need to push them into the repository.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've not done that yet.
Fair enough.
And you got to give it a name, and you should be kind of descriptive. And then, because this is the first time, nothing's checked. Once it knows a file is in source code control, it'll automatically select it. We'll see that in a second. But I've got to say, select them all, because I want to put everything in. In most cases, you're going to want to include everything, but let's say you've got maybe, I don't know, a file that gets created automatically that you don't care about. Maybe you don't need to put that in there. So I'm going to go ahead and do a commit, and it's successful. And then the last step is to do the push, and this is what's going to take it from my local repository and sync it into the cloud. We'll go ahead and hit OK. And there we go. So another 5 seconds or so, and it went ahead and put it into the cloud. Now if we go back to here and do a refresh, you can see there's an initial commit, and I can drill into that commit, and I can see all the objects. So if I look at that file, I've got a revision history. I can see what that file looks like. Yeah?
Is the cloud storage a part of purchasing the tool? Or is that something
No,
separate?
so the Visual Studio is separate. And Visual Studio is free for like up to 5 users on a project.
So that's purchased, or that's gotten through Microsoft?
Yeah. Well, you could use GitHub, you could use any Git service. You could do it locally, but you kind of lose the benefits of having it offsite and being able to easily share it with other people. So, all right, so let's look at what the next kind of logical flow is. And I showed you, I've got a thing here that said hello Vienna. Well, that doesn't make sense anymore. So I'm going to say hello Seattle. I'll go ahead and save this. And now if I go back here and say export, you can see it automatically highlighted one module because it detected that there's a change. So I'm going to go ahead and do my export. Finish successfully. And then we can go ahead and do our commit to push it to our local repository. Yes, pretty much. We'll say update city.
Not like that.
No. That's the problem with thinking we're 3 different things. We'll do our commit. We'll do our push. Now you can. Okay, there we go. So now it's up in there. 5 minutes? Yeah, I'm good. Okay, so now let's go look here, and let me go ahead and go back to the commits, and you should see there's a second commit here that only has 1 file, and you can see what I changed, right? So there's your revision history, and you can go back, you can compare, I've only got 2 versions, but you can compare, what was the original one and what does it look like today, or what was it last check-in?
For forms and the stuff that needs a master's degree, is the compare useful?
It is that you can see what you changed, and sometimes you'll make a simple change to a form, and you think, I just changed this one thing, and it changes all sorts of other stuff. It's kind of crazy. But if you change just some code,
Like a label or a snippet of code or something?
yeah.
So it's kind of like an ini file, if you remember what ini files look like. The issue is there's a bunch of properties that Access automatically updates. A lot of times if you have like font colors that are system colors, you'll end up with tons of lines that are just changing a color. If you have stuff in layouts and you just move something a few pixels, it actually changes a ton of things.
Right.
If you add a new control, you might be able to just see that, oh, there's clearly my new control. The problem, because I live in this every day, is you go in and you just want to make one change to some VBA code, and you'll be able to see that the VBA code is awesome. That's really clear. But you'll see 1 line change for VBA and 100 lines that are just random properties.
You gotta save your
access
commit.
securities.
You gotta save your thing and not talk. Anyways, so that's how it works. What Tim is doing now is he's going to go ahead and make a check-in of a new object, and I'll show you what that looks like to bring that down. So, yeah.
Is
Okay.
there a delay while that's happening?
Right there, it's done. So he added new stuff, right? So I will get an email eventually that'll say this, but because Tim just told me, hey, it's there, I can go back to Access. And in this case, I'm going to do a poll. So I'm going to go ahead and say, give me all the changes. So we'll do that. And one thing that's a little bit interesting is when you do the poll, it closes the dialog automatically, which it doesn't if you go do it natively. So I need to talk to Barron and see if there's a way to like leave it open. I don't know if he can, has control over that.
See what it actually
Yeah.
says.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense.
So that's there, and if we go look, we won't see any changes because we haven't done the import. So now I'm going to do an import, and you can see there's a new module called Ask Tim. So I'll say OK, and that's great, and now it just magically showed up. And you can see here as it is, and of course he's got a typo, so I'm going to go ahead and fix this real quick.
Accidentally on purpose like
Maybe, might have been. So I can make this change. Now, one of the cool things about it is you don't have to jump through that import-export, which can be slow if you've got a lot of objects. I know this is the only thing I want to change. So I'm just going to go here, and there's native menus in here, and I can just say export that file. And if we look in our repository, it shows up as red, because I've made a change that's uncommitted. So great, I've done that. Now I can go here, and I can say, go ahead and do my commit. And I said, fixed typo. It automatically selects that file. Now I can double click here, and I can see what it is. So this is a good way to kind of look at it and go, oh, what did I change? Because maybe you see a formula, like, I don't think I changed anything. That may be the thing you just ended up bumping a control, and you don't care. Yeah, well, you do, or Access did. So that's just a way you can kind of do a diff. So I'm going to go ahead and do the commit here, and then we just push it, and everything's going to be happy, we hope. Uh-oh, we got an error. So it's basically saying git doesn't do anything. I've got like a minute left, so I'm just going to skip through this real quick. But basically, I'm now going to pull things down, and it's saying, hey, there's a merge conflict. Do you want to resolve it? And it's saying, hey, this file is changed. And so now I have to resolve this manually. This is a conflict. It's only going to happen if you've got two people modifying an object at the same time. So Tim says he's created a function here, but he didn't get my typo. So I need to kind of resolve this. So what I'm going to do, and this is always kind of black magic, I'm going to say use mine. It doesn't delete for this change, but I can just go ahead and edit it and say, well, I don't want that line in there. So I'll delete that. And then I'm going to go ahead and save it, and it's going to say, hey, do you want to mark this as resolved? And I say yes. And I'll close it. I'll close that. And then I can do a commit, because I've made a change locally. Now, normally you want to kind of test your change, but for the sake of time, I'm going to blow through this. And you can see it's already come up with a message, like saying, hey, this is a merge that you're doing. It's all checked in. I'm just going to hit commit. It's going to give me a warning about having some goofy things. Now it's successful. Now I can push it up. So now on the server, if we go look, we'll see a whole kind of flurry of changes. And you can see how we kind of created this branch and then brought it back together here.
Oh yeah, visually.
Yeah, so you can kind of see, and it's cool. Access doesn't really work well with branches just because of the nature of it. You can't really do things, but you can kind of go push. Effectively create a branch and brought it right back. So that's great. So the only thing we have to do now is we've got to import our changes. So again, I can do the context menu, and I can say import. And now if we look at, we can see this is correct, and it's got Tim's function. So that's, depending on what you're getting, or what your conflict is, it may be that simple, or it may be that hard. And I'll just flip back to the deck and wrap up. So we looked at that. Working folder, repository, your commits, your sync, your push and your pull, the workflow. So in the perfect world, with like a single developer, it's export, commit, push, rinse and repeat. Like you do that over and over and over again. If you've got multiple developers, and let's say you haven't looked at it in a couple days, you definitely want to pull things down, import your changes, and then you may have to resolve conflicts. Then you can do your export, commit, and push to server. And hopefully nobody stepped on you in between. So demo for the conflicts. Sometimes it may resolve automatically. That's kind of a crapshoot. It depends on what changed. But like had Tim added just that function, and my function hadn't changed, it's probably smart to say, I'm just going to merge this in, it would be fine. Code only, yeah. So code only changes are pretty easy to do. If you're changing an object, like a form or report, you're probably better just to start over. And what we tend to do when that happens is we'll make a copy of ours. So Tim won that war checking in. So I'll make a copy of my form maybe, and then I'll import his, and then I can take my changes and put them back in. It's a whole lot easier than trying to resolve a form file. Just a few issues. Multi-value fields weren't supported until recently, and it wasn't a big deal for us because we use everything on SQL Server, with the exception of one table. It was a local table that we had solely for the purpose of using the UI. It got populated by controls just so people could check it. That was the only way to actually use that control. And the other thing we hit was the shared image resource, which came out in like 2010, I think. That uses the same kind of technology. And so we created an import-export routine that basically says, take all the objects right into that same folder, because anything in that folder is up for Git to go ahead and version. And then we have the reverse routine that says, okay, wipe out my table and now import all these tables and my resources come back. Now, I haven't played with this. This is something he put in last year, and I haven't had a chance to really tinker with it, but I think it works. Some tips, the performance can be kind of slow if you've got a lot of tables, so a lot of times we'll turn off the tables and reports, because we have lots of tables and queries rather in our reports. And that can help speed up your time if you're just mostly working on forms and reports. And then the biggest pet peeve for me is most of the forms are in German, which for Peter it's fine.
So what?
Yeah, exactly. No, but it's actually, and he's very responsive. It's been great. So anyways, I'm 2 minutes over, 3 minutes over. Questions?
If you don't want to have your stuff stored on the web, you want to do it within a company,
Yeah.
for instance, how would you do that?
I think you would just, I've never done it.
Yeah, so when he created, when you have Git installed, you can right click on any folder and just say create repository. And that'll create a blank repository or empty repository in that folder. So that's like when he went to Visual Studio Online and created the web thing. You can do that on any folder.
So you do that on a network share?
Yeah, so you can just go any folder on the network and right click on it and make create a repository there. And then if you want to clone, you can actually just copy the folder, and that you've created a clone. So you can just like copy it from one location to another. Git is super simple with making copies elsewhere. But yeah, you just point at your folder.
Which, for security issues, but of course you lose the offsite backup, and okay, well, what happens if you want to share with somebody outside your company? But yeah, it's totally viable.
Internally,
Yeah.
they do the backups.
Sure, yeah.
They don't want any of this
Yeah.
going as well.
Exactly.
It's one of the advantages of Git over Subversion is you have a lot of text files. You can control like merging strategies,
Yeah.
what patterns and what files are ignored, etc.
Yeah, no, Git has kind of become the de facto standard here, as I can tell. It's kind of like what everybody uses. I think even Microsoft is starting to use Git more and more with a lot of their open source initiatives.
Is Git is that an offensive word over here?
Not as offensive as in the UK.
I was going to say it's.
Yeah, and I tried looking up what and there was no real, it was kind of, it wasn't taken, it was kind of a play on get.
The original, I thought it was
No,
about swear words.
No. Silly get. Anyways, any other questions? All right, then I think we're ready for